We are Tim, Lee, and Oliver and Greg from Double Fine, and we're going to talk about our experience making Broken Age and, as it says right there, rethinking a classic genre for a modern era. So let us begin. Thanks for coming. So here is the situation. We had this crazy Kickstarter that kind of took us all by surprise. When it made a little more money than it was supposed to make. And we're really happy about that. But then there was the question of, what are we going to do the morning after? What are we going to do now? We had promised to make an old school point-and-click graphic adventure. And I really wanted to do a really good job with it, because the experience of having a Kickstarter is this really kind of emotional connection with a whole bunch of people who really believe in you, and they're like, we trust you, and trusting you with all our money that we're giving you, and we know you could screw this up, but we don't think you will. And so there's this even more of an obligation to these people to make something that that they'll want, which is great, because that's what you're doing anyway when you're making a game, right? You're making something the players will love. But now they were also our bosses, kind of, because they had funded us. So I thought about this question a lot about adventure games. We promised them something like this, Day of the Tentacle, where you point and you click, you walk around, you meet people, and I'd made these games for 10 years in the 90s, all through the 90s, making these at LucasArts. But they were always kind of, I don't want to say controversial, but they were always faced with this problem of how to make more people play them, because in the early 90s, they were really highly regarded as one of the major genres of games. But as soon as, we felt this moment as soon as Doom came out, or Wolfenstein, and then as soon as, I think one of the Mario 3, when it really took off, we're like, things are really changing in this industry, and I don't think these disc-based genres that we're so used to are going to be the big kings of the industry forever. And we got to make graphic adventures more appealing, maybe adding action elements, or adding 3D, or doing all these things to try and make them more and more appealing. And eventually, after Grim Fandango, LucasArts really stopped making these. And it was decided they were not really commercially viable. But thanks to the magic of Kickstarter, we were making another one. So when I started out, I went back to my old mentor and boss. He's old. He was previously my mentor and boss. He actually is really old. So I went to Ron Gilbert, who was one of the people who hired me at LucasArts and created Monkey Island, the first thing I ever worked on. And I had a long conversation with him about what was special about adventure games. Because there were a lot of things that we thought were special about them at the time that they had a monopoly on, that they really didn't have a monopoly on anymore. They were some of the first games that had really high fidelity art in them, and they had really mature storylines and a narrative that was deeper than most of the games at the time, deeper than Pac-Man. But but since then, games had matured a lot, and they were, quote-unquote mature narratives in other games too, and there's definitely high fidelity art in a lot of games, and story and dialogue, and a lot of the things that we used to think of as that the signature tropes of adventure games were all over. So is there any point to adventure games anymore? And we talked about there was still things that we thought were special about them, and things that we really liked, and we wanted to really make sure we kept those and then try to do new things with adventure games. So some of the things we really liked was pacing. They really, adventure games, they work at your own pace. They let you solve puzzles at the speed of which your brain is operating. You can stand there and think for a long time. I realized I picked the absolute worst slide for this, by the way, because this is the point in Monkey 2 where you're being hounded by LeChuck all throughout these caverns, and you don't have any time to think about what you're doing. But it's kind of the exception that proves the rule. Uh-oh, I just got more self-conscious because Noah Falstein's over there. So now you know I'm lying if I talk about anything. Anyway, so when I thought of the dig, okay, so this is the kind of the exception that proves the rule to this point. It brings to light how usually in an adventure game you're not worried about someone sniping you in the head or doing anything rushed. You don't have to be physically dexterous to solve an adventure game. You just have to sit there and scratch your head and maybe go up and walk around the block and come back, and then you know how to solve a puzzle. And that's a different kind of playing experience than a lot of games. There's also interesting things that have. Yeah, someone said yes. Yeah, indie, yes. I hope you're not talking about the swastika. Okay, indie, yes. This is just a random slide, but there's kind of also a metagame element to adventure games where they rely on your knowledge as a human being a little bit more. Your there's games, adventure games I played where I had to know the chemical formulation of gunpowder in order to solve a puzzle, and that's just so weird and unusual for games. Like most games you play today, all the information you need is on the screen, or else it's kind of a usability error if you don't like provide them everything they need to know. As if someone was just born and was playing a game, they have to like have everything presented to them. But with adventure games, you could really rely on someone to know that like, oh, cats like fish, so if you want to lure a cat into a trap, you can use a piece of fish. And like there are these things where you're applying your own world knowledge to it to solve puzzles. And it was also okay to get stuck. You know, in adventure games, and maybe it was okay to get stuck because that's the only way we knew how to do it. But it was acceptable for someone to not know what to do for a short period of time. And I just picked this random screenshot of Uncharted. I don't think it happened in this room, but there was a point in Uncharted 2, which is a really good game, but there's this one temple you walk into, and I know I had to get to the ceiling of it, and I was like, oh, I think I see a ledge there, and there's a little crack there. And I started to get that pleasant puzzle-solving feeling like in the first Tomb Raider game, you know, and then you're trying to figure out how to shimmy along a ledge and climb a pole to get all the way out of the tomb. And right when I was about to figure it out, the text like push A against post to climb wall came up, and I was like, I was just about to figure that out. That's so annoying. Why couldn't I just like think about that for a little while? Like have some faith. I know I was just standing there not touching the controller, but I was really going to figure it out. So I mean, doing that exact balance though between good stuck and bad stuck was an important balancing point. But then I did more interviews, not just with Ron, but with people who were making modern adventure games, like Machinarium team and Super Brothers and Chris from Cappy, who made Sword and Sorcery, and kind of get their perspectives on what they thought was important in modern adventure games. And some of them, like the Sword and Sorcery guys were talking about, they had kind of more of a traditional adventure game in mind, but the puzzles were kind of a block to the flow, and they wanted to make something where someone was more like you're walking through an album. And I think that's definitely something specific to the game they were making, but I thought about that for a while. Like, are puzzles a block to the flow? Like, do we just put them in there because we want to think it's a game when it really is an interactive narrative experience? So I thought hard about that. And then I realized I really did still like puzzles, and I really because some of the things that people were complaining about with puzzles, they were really just complaining about bad puzzles, like puzzles where you didn't know at all what you were supposed to do, or you knew exactly what you wanted to do, but there's no way to actually do it, and that there's a real entertainment to being stuck in the right way. Like when someone's telling you a puzzle, I always think of my older brother was always telling me these like riddles, and he's like, do you know what the answer is? And he'd be kind of winking at me. I'd be like, oh, I should be able to figure this out. It's so close. And he'd give me a little hint, and I'd be like, oh man, I'm so and then someone else in the room would be like, I know what it is. And I'm like, don't tell me, I got it. And there's kind of a pleasant feeling because your brain is still moving. Like you're still, even though your character in the game is completely stuck and not going anywhere, your brain is still making progress towards the goal as it figures things out, and that's kind of pleasant. And it's hard for the game to know whether you're doing that or whether it should throw out the text to like tell you the answer. But I felt like a well-crafted puzzle could still really have a strong, important place in a modern adventure games. And but to do them well, there's a theoretical and a really practical way, I think, of pushing towards really good puzzles in adventure games. So like a rough version of good puzzle theory for me is having a really clear obstacle, like there's a ravine. You can see exactly what your block is. And it's not just important to block the player's progress, but to show them what it is that's blocking it so they know kind of what to think about, mentally focus on. But then also clear motivation, like why do they want to get across the ravine? Not just because the ravine is there. I mean, that in many games that actually is good enough. People will still try and cross the ravine, but you really want to put something on the other side they really, really, really want. And responses for failed solutions. Like if you have a ravine and there's a partial bridge going across it and the player tries to like fix the bridge with a piece of rope, you better have anticipated that and have a rewarding response for that. Either it kind of works or it kind of gives you a hint towards the actual solution. And then if you get half the puzzle right, like you have the rope but you don't have the nails or something like that, games often fail to tell you that you got half of it right. So you got to give somebody a reward for each step. It's like, yeah, you're getting there, keep working on it, like that older brother winking thing. And there definitely has to be like an aha feeling after you solve the puzzle and not a WTF feeling, because a lot of puzzles you're like, someone tells you the answer, you're like, well, I never would have gotten that. That's so stupid. That's so stupid. I'm so mad. I'm gonna go to the forums right now. They have to have that feeling like, aha, that's exactly, oh, I should have gotten that. That was so obvious. And then I think there's even like a post, like an aftertaste of puzzles that's important. Like I think you should be able to appreciate it afterwards as a great narrative thing. Like I totally solved that puzzle by punching that sea monster in the eye, like something that you want to tell your friends about. Not like I clicked on these 3 things and the one that was largest solved the puzzle. Like just something that actually just sounds like you had this amazing adventure is really great for people just talking about your game and remembering it fondly and even wanting to play it again. So on the practical side of pushing towards better puzzles and a pleasant stuck feeling in an adventure game is playtesting. And here's us playtesting Broken Age. We didn't do this. We did this somewhat in the old days. We had pizza orgies, and we'd pizza orgies, not as sexy as it sounds, because the pizza gets everywhere. And no, we would bring in our friends and family, and we would order a whole bunch of pizza, and then everyone would have sex. And so it's like we'd all play the game, and then we'd get together and talk in a group, and people would tell us what they thought about the game. And it was really valuable and rewarding. And we did some of this other kind of testing that we do now at Double Fine, but we're doing a lot of it now, like 3 times a week or something. And we watch people play the game. We just take notes of just like where they're putting the cursor, because it's so frustrating to watch someone, like you put the toaster, and if they touch the toaster, they'll be teleported to the next dimension, and the cursor goes over every cupboard in like a C shape around the toaster and around the other side, and they're like, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. It's fun, and it's also horrible to have them watch you play the game. But you can get that kind of feeling of are they having a good time being stuck or a bad time, and then find the things that you never realize are totally unfair about your design. Like, yeah, there's no reason anyone would ever click on that toaster because it's dark and it's in the corner of the room, and we specifically told you don't touch any toasters. And so you can take out these really egregious things, because whenever I talk to anybody about one of my old games, and they say, oh, I like that game, but I didn't finish it. And if it's like Grim Fandango, I know they got stuck on the signpost puzzle. And if it's like Full Throttle, I know they got stuck in the junkyard or the Mine Road or a few other places. But I mean, I can usually tell there's like a few just like outstanding places where everybody got stuck. And it's like if you can just take those out, it's not like you're removing every place that someone gets stuck, but you can take out the things that make people just rage quit the game and walk away. So, oh, and when you're playtesting, you're trying to find these 3 things: the place where the obstacle is discovered, the place where the solution is realized, and the place where the solution is actually executed. And those can be like misordered if you do things wrong. So they find the solution before they find the problem. They find the ladder before they get to the ravine, or they discover the obstacle and they realize the solution right away. It's like immediate, and then your game is just a series of just hassles or like instructions. Or there's a nice long, like 15-minute period where they discover the obstacle and then they just find the solution. And then you better have a really quick period where the solution is actually executed upon. Because the worst thing in a puzzle and an adventure game is just know exactly what to do, and you're just like, I don't know the word to type in a text adventure or something like that. Or I clicked on the door to open it, but I had to click on the doorknob. These are just unforgivable sins that we've done many times. So those are the things that we want to keep about adventure games. And the things we got rid of or changed was we really simplified the interface. And it's really just a progression of, like to think of like, what if we kept making adventure games all these years? What would they be like now? And if you saw this progression, and no one remembers these meetings where we were like, do we really need all these verbs? Let me make a mention of 15 verbs. And every game we kind of simplify it to Monkey Island had 9. Full Throttle had 4, although the tongue doubled had a couple different things. Grim Fandango had 2, essentially. And we started realizing we had these meetings like, is every verb just used? I mean, there's like a door in an adventure game, and you close it, that's good, but when the door is closed, you don't want to close it again, so the closed verb is useless. And if you open it twice, that's stupid. You only want to open a closed door and close an open door. So really just use the use verb on it, and the door should just know, oh, I'm open, therefore close me. And then we started realizing with pushing and pulling levers, it's the same way. If the lever's this way, you want to push it, you want to say use. So anyway, we just felt like every single verb is actually just use. And even though some people lament the loss of being able to say, I'm going to push the glass of water over instead of picking it up, it rarely came up as like a useful thing in terms of our design. So we also realized that the inventory are the verbs. So here's a shot of Broken Age with our inventory on the screen, and each inventory object is really a verb that you're using in the world, and you still have to write dialogue or responses for every single. When you can give that bird every single one of those objects, and have some sort of response for what that is, and you can still have a lot of hidden humor in the game, which are some of the most fun things about adventure games, is hiding those little responses. So that's just my brief summary overall of what I was trying to get at as far as a modern adventure game. We want to modernize the things that these guys are going to talk about, which is a lot of the presentation of it and experience it. But the heart of it, I felt like it was really important to keep certain elements really old school, because the unique way our game was funded was from people who said, we like those games, and you don't have to change a lot to make us like them, because we already do. So we kept a lot of that and modernized the things that we wanted to and make them better and better looking. And speaking of better looking, our next speaker is going to come, Mr. Lee Petty from Double Fine, to talk about his stuff.
Hey everyone, that's an awesome picture. Thanks, Tim. That's why I worked on Brutal Legend. All right. Yeah, my name is Lee Petty, and I do in fact love adventure games. I have the fortune of working with Tim on Broken Age. I'm the art director on the project. And really, when we got a chance to make this game, I started thinking, well, why do I love adventure games? I mean, there's so many things to love, but specifically, what about adventure games really left a lasting impression on me? And I started thinking about all these games I played in the 90s when older men, such as Tim, were making them. And, they all were magical worlds to me. They really captured my imagination, not only just the art style, but I really felt part of those worlds. And it's not just old adventure games. I found that some of the modern adventure games I've been playing, like Machinarium or Sword and Sorcery, or recently Kentucky Route Zero, they're very different in a lot of ways, but they still had some of the same core appeal to me, which I could describe simply as I like moving through or exploring a unique world at my own pace. And although that sounds like a simple thing, being able to take your time in a world and look at all the details and interact with things, I think it puts you in a place that I don't feel the same way in games where I'm kind of being shoved through a fidelity funnel, or maybe it's just all very abstract. And so it has a really interesting balance for me. And I wanted to see how we could keep that sensibility and make it even more interesting visually as we worked on Broken Age. So at the start of the game, we knew it was going to be 2D. But we also knew that even though we were making a classic game, in some ways, as Tim said, we wanted to make something new too. We wanted to make something that would stand on its own and not just seem like purely a retro throwback. So for me, that once again started thinking about how am I going to make this world more engaging, fun to spend time in, and just visually beautiful. And when I thought about the old games, even though I remembered them very fondly, they were largely very static worlds. A lot of times there was really nothing moving, or really not much changed over time. And the first idea I had of how we could deal with that is to add a more modern camera to the game, which would make the world feel more alive. So this scene in Monkey Island, when we started thinking about this, I remembered this scene. I was like, oh yeah, there was this great scene in Monkey Island when you're walking on the docks and the waves are rolling and there's all these layers of detail in the front and they parallax as you walk by. But here's actually what it kind of looks like instead. So it's still pretty awesome in its own way, but here's the, and you can see it's really just one layer and nothing's moving, right? But it did capture my imagination, and there was something magical just about that simple scroll at the time. So I thought that would be an interesting place to start. So this is the first scene that Bagel painted, our lead artist on the project, and we used this as the reason why I painted it so horizontally is I wanted to sort of recreate that experience in Broken Age. But what we did is we painted it in layers in Photoshop from the start, and knew that we were going to separate those layers so that as the player moved, the camera would follow, and then as the camera followed, those layers would parallax at different speeds, giving the illusion of depth, right? And this is pretty much what it looked like. Well, this is what it currently looks like. So she walks to the edge, the camera follows, and the various layers in there move at different rates. So pretty cool, but not really that special, right? I mean, there's a lot of 2D games out there that do this. It's a common technique to have additional planes to add depth. But then I started thinking, well, what if the player could actually walk into the canvas? Like, what if they could actually go down to that cabin, and not just walk down to that cabin, but actually have the camera follow them as they walk down to that cabin? And I told Oliver this, and he was like, yeah, right. Yeah, but no, he was... but with their German accent. So that needed new tech. And so we started looking at, okay, what do they do in the old games, right? So here's an example, another from Monkey Island that I remember really fondly. And this is entirely faked, the sense of walking in the depth. They would create these walk boxes, which would define where the player could walk. And as the player walked up or down on the screen, they'd simply scale the character up or down, which would give the illusion that they're walking into depth, as long as the camera didn't move. And just this is what it looked like. So you can see here, comes out. They're just sort of scaling the character as he moves down on the screen, and they're going to scale him down as he moves back. The camera slid horizontally there, but it doesn't follow the character, and it's reasonably convincing. But for our game, like I said, we had split it into layers already, and this is our editor here, and you can see the layers are arranged. They actually are offset in actual Z depth, and then we created a walk box per layer. So here's a little close-up there, and you can see those green polygons are kind of where the player can walk, and we added this concept of a layer bridge. That's those yellow lines, and the layer bridge actually allows the player to walk from one layer to another in Z depth. So they're actually changing actual layers. It's not just a visual trick. And then that let us have the camera follow them. And the camera would continue that path. So here's what that looks like in Broken Age. Same scene. So as the character moves down here, this isn't a cutscene, this is just the follow cam in the game, following the character as they kind of move into the world. I'll go through that door. All right, so that was pretty cool. That was another layer that I hadn't really seen, and it still felt very adventure game to me in its presentation. But at this point, we had a real concept of a camera, and we had some complex scenes like this one that had multiple paths, and there's a lot of different interactions. So we wanted to use the camera at this point to follow the player, to cut, to zoom, not only to make the exploration a little more visually interesting, but also to help highlight important interactive areas or let the player know they've now kind of moved into a space where they could maybe do something or have an interaction without giving them an explicit hint. So if you walk around this area, you'll see what the camera does. So the player walks up to one of the cobblers, it cuts in there because the player could have an interaction with this character. And as they move away, we actually have the camera move back, and that shows off some of the parallax in depth. And the player's going to go over here and can't quite reach up that nest, so they're going to use this ladder to get up to it. Oh yeah, spoiler, sorry. Sure. And then once they do that, the camera cuts again to highlight the path of where they could connect. So all this information was available in that big shot, but this kind of gives it a little extra emphasis, let them know they're making progress. So yeah, dialogue tree interaction. So this is another shot from Monkey Island, and dialogue trees are one of those things that we decided early on we wanted to keep. They're in adventure games, right? So when you interact with another player, you give them a list of dialogue choices that you can choose. They play an animation or reaction, and you get other choices. And this was also an incredibly static experience in the old games, but it wasn't just because of the limited animation. In this particular example of Monkey Island, the eyes and mouth textures would kind of get swapped out, but it was also because the camera was static. We're used to sort of dialogue between two characters or three characters have a certain cinematic language, which originally wasn't present at all in those old games. But now that we had all these cameras, we could use those to enhance our dialogue tree situation. So what we did is we placed multiple cameras in the world, and any line of dialogue could call on those cameras as part of it. And so we combined that with looped animations for the character speaking and gestures based on the dialogue. Tim would actually tag the dialogue like angry, and it would know to play like angry animation loops. So this let us build a more cinematic dialogue tree experience without doing like a hand-authored cutscene, because there are thousands of these things in the game. And here's what they look like. There's a little audio in this too.
Can you guys help me? I need to get back to Sugar Bunting right away.
You're from Sugar Bunting? So that's why you smell like frosting.
What's the big rush? Stay here and float a while.
So there's a little sample of how that works. All right, so the camera stuff was working pretty well, but based on the story and the early design, we knew we had a ton of different diverse environments. And while that's awesome, I was a little worried about how the characters were going to sit in those environments. We had two different main characters with very different types of environments. And even though we had this very specific painted look that we were trying to go after, I was a little worried about how these characters would sit in the scene. So I wanted to try experimenting with lighting on the characters. And the lighting needed to be done in such a way to not stomp on the painted style. And it also had to be kind of cheap because it had to work on all of our platforms, because we're supporting every platform ever made. Maybe not the ColecoVision. So we settled on kind of a two two-type of lighting approach for the characters. So the first one we call the ambient gradient lighting, and this we are able to specify in the world points where we just set a top and bottom color. There's a few other parameters we have over the gradient to control its application, and that's multiplied on the character. And so you can see the example here is an unlit character on the left, and it's kind of being combined with this warmer color. And this helps the character sit in the scene. It could be, if it was there in a cool scene, it could be a bluer color or what have you, and that would help them just feel part of the world a little bit, but doesn't really change their appearance too much. And it's very low frequency and cheap. But we also wanted to have something a little sharper that could provide some directionality, and so we added a rim lighting pass as well. And this is added to the character. These are effectively, they're using sort of, for lack of a better term, hand-authored normal maps, but they're a very painterly type of experience to create them, and the game will activate that rim lighting when the character's in the right spot. So what we do is we take a scene like this. It's a scene from the boys' world, and this is our editor here, and you can see where those little yellow circles are. That's where we've set up some lights with their bounds, and the little gradient rectangles there show the kind of colors that are associated with each of those. And then we can also add some rim lighting information. So the rim light has its own color and has a direction. So as the character moves in and out of those lights, the color will change, their ambient color will change, and the rim will actually change on them. And that really helps make them feel part of the world. It's pretty cool. So here's what it looks like. It's going to start off with the lighting off. They're going to kind of walk around the world. So walking around here, this is his sort of neutral texture is how they're painted, which work okay in this particular scene. But he gets in these dark areas here, and now the lighting's on. So now as he walks in the lights, you can see the rim is kicking up above him, hitting his head and shoulders, and it's changing direction as he moves around. And just makes it feel like he's actually passing in front of those lights. Yeah. So I could talk so much more about all the things we want to do with it visually, but I chose to talk about the lighting and the camera because I thought those were two ways that we added some dynamics to the game while still keeping it a layered, painted game and still felt very much like a traditional adventure game. And I'm hoping that those will make those worlds magical for new players, just like those old games were for me. And yeah, these are just ideas, though, and without awesome technical execution, well, they're nothing. And to talk about that is our lead programmer, Oliver German last name. Anyways, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lee, for that introduction. Hey guys, my name is Oliver Franzke, and I'm indeed the lead programmer of Broken Age. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the tech challenges that we ran into while making Broken Age. And I know you're all super excited about highly parallelized assembly code, especially Lee. No, we won't talk about that. Just from a very high-level perspective, I want to briefly touch on kind of our engine choices and the authoring choices that we made. And also I want to talk about some of the challenges associated with the target platforms that we chose to support. And when you think about the original Monkey Island game, that is pretty much available on any computing device under the sun right now. Now, that wasn't quite the case when it initially came out because it was obviously made for a handful of specific computers, but then because of its popularity, it got kind of ported to all of those other platforms. Now, for Broken Age, we wanted to be available, or we wanted to make the game available to as many people as possible so they can experience this awesome story. And that meant we had to support a lot of different target platforms. And with that, we had to make a decision, how are we going to approach this from a technical point of view? So when we started, we looked at our internal engine called Buddha that was developed for Brutal Legend. And if you played Brutal Legend, you know it's like an open world 3D game that's pretty awesome. But open world in 3D is almost like the opposite description of what Broken Age is as a classic 2D point-and-click adventure game. And in addition to that, at the time when we started, our Buddha engine also did not actually work on mobile devices. Now that has since changed, but back then it wasn't quite ready yet. So effectively we couldn't use the tech base, and we had to choose something else. And we opted for the open source Moa engine that was initially developed by Zipline Games, and we have since extended it quite a lot to suit our needs. But as you probably know, with like changing an engine also comes a change of kind of in your authoring pipeline, and Broken Age is no exception there. Since Brutal Legend was very 3D centric, it was very much the authoring pipeline was kind of set up around Maya as a central tool, and that really didn't help us very much for Broken Age. So what we did instead is we actually rewrote or implemented a lot of pipeline stages from scratch. And the kind of central hub of all of that is a tool called 2HB, which is short for Two-Headed Baby, which is, as you know, the logo of Double Fine. And you can see a screenshot up here in the right corner. And that is basically kind of our scene creation editing tool, and allows you to, like Lee said, specify how far the layers are away from the camera, where the characters are, lights, effects, and stuff like that, as well as gameplay-related things like, walk boxes and hitbox and stuff like that. It also allows the gameplay programmers actually to write Lua directly in the editor and debug it, which made it a very helpful tool. But obviously we couldn't create all of the assets in that tool. It would have been insane to write some kind of image editing tool from scratch. So we do still use Photoshop and Maya as kind of external pipeline tools, and I will talk a little bit about how that works. And in addition to that, we also were able to reuse some of our proprietary tools like the cutscene editor that you can see in the lower left corner. Now, Lee already kind of talked about the environments a little bit, and those were authored in Photoshop as multi-layered images, and you can see that here a little bit, like how they actually are composed in game if you kind of switch in the debug camera and rotate out. And we're using groups and kind of a very well-specified naming convention to kind of attach additional semantic meanings to those layers. And then we have a custom exporter that will take that file and extract out the different layers as individual images that then get converted into more hardware-friendly representation on our build server. In addition to that, 2HB will also detect that those images change and actually automatically update the game or the live preview in the tool, which allows us to very quickly iterate on those things. So that really helped us a lot. Now, the other part of the equation are obviously the characters. And our goal for the characters was to make them very, very expressive, because they need to be able to convey the emotion to the player, what's happening, so you can establish a kind of connection between the player and the characters in the game. And we came up with something called the hybrid rig. And what we're doing here is basically combining the advantages of a traditional rig geometry rig that is used very commonly in 3D games these days with the expressiveness of flipbook animations, which is kind of how characters were made back in the old days. Like, an animator would sit there and paint individual poses for the characters, and those would be cycled through to create like the illusion of a moving character. And we wanted both of those techniques to work for us. So the way it works, a texture artist will actually paint the individual body parts, and then will hand it off to a rigger who then goes into Maya and creates this geometry representation that you can see there, and then texture map it just like in any other game. Create a skeleton and bind the skin to that skeleton. And then animators can go and create animations and cutscenes. And not only can they animate the joints to move arms around and stuff like that, they can also directly control the visibility of each one of those geometry pieces, which allows or gives them a lot of flexibility. When they, for example, want to switch out different pieces for the hand or mouse and stuff like that, they can be very expressive. Now, the good thing about that is, or there are multiple good things about this, and one of the good things is that since this pipeline is very Maya-based again, it allowed us to actually reuse a lot of our existing tools, which meant, animators and other artists could very easily switch over to Broken Age and would be able to hit the ground running and create valuable assets pretty much right away. But I also want to argue that, and I think that's the only numbers you will see. I want to argue that it would have been impossible for us to actually make the game in the kind of traditional way how it was done 20 years ago. Because if we were to represent all of the animation frames with hand-drawn character sprites, we would actually require roughly 250 times the amount of memory. And it would have been impossible for us to load a scene with that representation on a mobile device. So this representation really helped us in multiple ways to actually make this game happen. And it also very nicely transitions over to the second topic I want to quickly talk about, which are target platforms. Now, part of the original Kickstarter promise were not only desktop platforms, that have a mouse and you can point and click, but also mobile devices that are predominantly touch-based. And it's pretty obvious that the touch-based interface actually maps quite nicely to this kind of gameplay mechanics. It's just point and tab, right? But it kind of opened up a kind of or like a bunch of technical challenges for us to make this work. And so here's a picture of my desk I took about 2 months ago or so, and you can see the game actually running on all those different devices. And if I actually enable the platform overlay, you can see that the game is running on Windows, Mac OS X, Linux, iOS phone and tablet, Android phones and tablets, all kind of varieties and stuff like that. But the problem was, or like, we spent a lot of time actually making this work, because if you look at the performance characteristics between, like, you know, a high-end PC and, you know, a phone, an Android phone, they're quite different, and we really took that into consideration right from the beginning when we decided how to author those assets, in order to make sure that the game will actually work on those devices, because nothing is worse than, you know, having it all run beautifully on your PC, and then you want to get it run on your phone, and it's just not possible. But in addition to the difference between desktop and mobile platforms, we also ran into interesting stuff in the mobile market by itself. So here's a very interesting picture. That's the OpenSignal Android fragmentation report from this year. And you see a lot of colored boxes. In each one of those colored boxes is the market share of an Android device right now. Now the interesting thing is each one of these devices has, you know, very different performance and hardware characteristics. You know, one device has a lot of memory and a pretty strong GPU. Another one has not so much memory and it's not so powerful. And the point I wanted to make here is that it would have been completely unrealistic to create like a specialized, optimized version for each one of those devices. So what we needed was really like a runtime scalability approach. And what that means is basically we spend a lot of time writing technology that allows us to get the most out of the hardware that you run the game on, while still making the game, you know, playable. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to really go very deep into the technical details here, but if you're interested in that, I gave a presentation at GDC Europe earlier this year about this specific topic. Now, obviously, having the game run on all those different devices is only one thing. You need to have a community that's actually quite excited about the game and wants to play it. And with that, I will hand it over to Greg, who's going to talk about community and chest hair.
Hello. Yeah, this is kind of low. So yeah, my name's Greg Rice, and this is a picture of how I look on the weekend. I am the producer of Broken Age, as well as a brand manager at Double Fine. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the latter, actually. Production on the game has been a little unique, but most of that is kind of things that are supporting the strange marketing needs for the project. So as Tim said, this whole project started as a Kickstarter a year and a half ago. And so you can see just from this that this is far from traditional, and it was definitely a whole new thing that we're trying out. And it's something that was kind of necessary for the project, just because it actually started as a documentary first. So we wanted to make a documentary about the making of a video game from the start to finish. And, you know, we wanted to really show everything and be really transparent with it and kind of inform people on what game development is like. And we just knew that would be kind of difficult with a game that was going to be funded by a publisher, just because it meant showing things earlier than you normally would and things that aren't necessarily as polished as you usually would show in a traditional marketing campaign. So it quickly became clear that in order to make this work, it had to be a project that was self-financed, and we decided to loop it in with a Kickstarter and make it part of that. And once that decision was made, I think it kind of let us run a little bit with what the idea of the game should be. And we thought that adventure game was something that, you know, people come up to us at conventions and talk about and ask about and are always wanting to play another adventure game from Tim. But it's something that is, like Tim said, a difficult sell for a publisher. And both of those reasons kind of made it seem like it was a good fit for the Kickstarter, because it wouldn't necessarily probably be able to be made any other way. And as you can see, it turned out really well, and people were really excited about it. And it kind of just really quickly thrust us into open development, which was something that we hadn't done up to this point. We had started doing some of our own marketing campaigns for our games, but this was definitely a whole new beast. And, you know, our backer count was 87,000 at the time. It's only gone up because of our Slacker backer program. So it was just a lot of people that we knew we had to take care of from the very start. So one of the ways that we did that is we started this private backer forum right as soon as the campaign ended, which was just a place for our backers to kind of unite and talk about the project. And we hired a community manager specifically to kind of moderate this. And it was something that was very active at the start, and it was something that both the team and our fans were getting a lot out of. We were jumping in pretty frequently, almost every week, doing posts about what we were thinking about for the game and what kind of stuff we were doing at these early stages of the game. And it felt like we were doing a lot of communication, a lot of documentary episodes, and a lot of updates from the team. But this was all something that was, really private to our backers through these forums. And it was something that people who were not backers or in the press just kind of felt like we had kind of gone quiet for a while after our project launched and was financed. So we made this website as a way to kind of talk. Still, this is basically just compiling all of the stuff from our backer forums, but in a public view, so people can kind of see all the things that we were doing and get an idea of what they would be seeing if they were a backer. And I think this helped just with our Slacker backer campaign, getting people more excited about seeing the kind of things that they were missing and jumping in there. And like I said, we were doing a lot of posts. So the documentary that was following us from the start was doing episodes about every month and a half. We were doing updates from team members about weekly as well at the start. And it quickly became a lot, and it took a lot of our time. And so we started kind of relying a little bit more on the documentary to be the place to talk about the games. But there definitely was still a lot of really great content in the backer forums. And it started out with a lot of brainstorming kind of things. So this is a thread that Tim started, which was trying to brainstorm some new environment concepts for the game when the game was really just starting to take shape, trying to get ideas from our backers about new locations that they hadn't seen in games or locations that they might want to see. And you can see that this ended up being like a 54-page thread. And we ended up pulling out some of these ideas in a concept art jam and actually making some concept art of some of our favorites. And a few of them even ended up making their way into the games. And this is another one from Tim, which is just posting some of our really early kind of experiments with the main character and seeing what feedback we got from the fans on that, and kind of working with them to see if the things that we were feeling about the characters were the same things that they were thinking. And I think both of these threads are really good examples of just kind of engaging our community in the development of the game, and I guess using them to kind of inform decisions we were making there. And this was something that people got super into and involved in, and it felt like it went a long way to really kind of growing the community around the game and gaining a lot of trust with our backers. And I think the next slide is a video about that. Yes.
I just remember the day where I was on my computer reading the news and I see the headline, "Double Fine to Kickstart New Adventure Game." There's no way this is true. And it was.
I grew up playing adventure games. Maniac Mansion, Monkey Island,
Day of the Tentacle,
Full Throttle, which are my favorite adventure games.
Grim Fandango was my favorite game of all time.
As I grew up, I was like, I've tried playing more and more of those games, but they started disappearing.
I miss the old days of when we had games that were driven by a creative narrative.
Where everything is new and wondrous and expansive.
I love the puzzles that are in adventure games.
I will pay way more money for a game that tests my smarts.
It's just really grabbing for all ages and all audiences.
And I think that's what everyone here is looking for, that kernel that Double Fine seems to have such an innate grasp of.
So when I heard about a Double Fine adventure game Kickstarter, there was no hesitation. I backed the hell out of it.
Because damn it, I believe in the little guy. Tim Schafer might look big, but he's little, where it counts. In here.
After I contributed, I was actually up all night refreshing the page on the Kickstarter website, and it was so amazing to see the numbers just get higher and higher.
It's a weird phenomenon just to see, people passionate about adventure games, interested in learning about how games are made.
We're taking a journey with the creators as they go through and make decisions about what the game is going to look like and what parts are going to make it and not. I've already gotten my money's worth, even though I haven't even played the game yet, because I've been able to watch the documentaries and really just feel a part of this process and see everything come together.
My favorite parts is when Tim actually asked us backers to help brainstorm ideas. And somebody actually did concept art of Origami Land.
They're actually listening to their community. They're actually changing things up a bit. The programmers actually coming in and explaining the process to the people. We'd all get together and we'd all watch it when a new one would finally come out. We had to wait for each other. It was like a new Game of Thrones episode.
That was so cool. Never thought about how they go from concept to something real and then revision, redoing everything over from the start.
It was nice to see you guys struggle, not having enough money and having to struggle a little bit to get through everything, put things in a nice perspective. These things happen. It's a creative process.
And it really is looking like it's shaping up to be great.
I love the art style. I think it's fantastic.
Really can't wait to experience the story that's waiting for us there.
And it's been so fun and inspiring as I'm working on a game of my own right now.
To a certain point, I feel like we've even gotten to know a lot of the team working on it. Almost like build a relationship with the developers of this game, of this awesome company. And I never would have had that experience if I hadn't become a backer.
So something that was touched on a little bit in that video, and something that I really was excited about going into this, was this concept of kind of educating people a little bit on game development. I think a lot of us kind of grew up always excited about games and playing games through our whole lives, and it was something that there was just not a lot of information out there about what game development was like. And that was one of the things that we were really excited about with the documentary, but it is also something that's happened on our backer forums too, which is that in addition to all the posts like we were looking at before that were just kind of involving people in some of the decisions we were making, there was also a lot of really in-depth posts made about kind of behind the scenes how things are getting done. So this one specifically was from Oliver, and it is a post about early on kind of decisions being made around which engines we're going to be using for the game. And these posts were interesting because a lot of people in the forum started jumping on that it seemed were game developers or indie developers or aspirational, and we're really getting a lot out of these conversations that we're having. And here's another one from Lee, which is kind of about similar stuff we were talking about earlier with character art pipeline. And so we were just getting really comfortable with this kind of interaction we're having with our backers, of really kind of laying it all out there, involving them in the process, and treating them as if they were kind of members of the team. And it's something that had been working well with us in the past on our marketing for our games, is just this kind of really grassroots approach to everything, and speaking to people like they're people, and like they just understand what you're doing as long as you give them enough information to kind of form their opinions. And so here was a post that I put up. This is just kind of a breakdown of the budget from a fairly high level, but I think it was good for transparency and clarification, just because a lot of people outside the industry don't have a lot of information about how much games cost and where that money goes and why it costs that much. So we wanted to kind of give a breakdown, just because we were seeing a lot of confusion about how much money was going to our rewards versus into the game versus into the documentary that we were doing. And it went over really well, and I think it was something that was kind of enlightening for a lot of people. But it really was just another example of us getting more and more comfortable with kind of sharing the nitty-gritty details of our game. And up to this point, we didn't really have any issues with it. And then we put up this post, which was kind of it came around the time when we realized the project was going a little bit longer than we intended and was going to potentially go over budget as well. And we wanted to, again, just be really upfront with our backers about this. And so we put up this piece from Tim that was kind of like a really transparent, conversational type of communication with our backers, kind of in the spirit and style of the stuff that we had been doing before. And this was one thing that did end up getting picked up by the press and turned into some headlines. Which was interesting, and it was a difficult process for sure, and it was kind of highlighting the fact that we had this problem where one of the rewards for our Kickstarter was kind of this behind-the-scenes look, behind the curtain, like getting to really see everything that was happening, basically as if you were a part of the team. But then there was this kind of curtain or a barrier that people who weren't our backers weren't getting a lot of that information. And so for this one specifically, this information did get out there without kind of the context that we had had and the stuff that we've been talking about before, about all these other years worth of posts and videos explaining how we got to the point we were at. And so that was a really difficult thing for us to handle, just because, you know, we're pretty busy. We're a small team. We're developing this game while trying to also manage all of our backers. And so what the nice thing that we saw come out of it was basically that all of our backers did that work for us. And this is a comment thread from one of these articles, and pretty much all of them, all of our backers that you saw in that video, were jumping in and kind of laying out the facts and explaining why they, as backers, weren't actually really upset with this and didn't think it was as big of a deal as it was being made to be. So it was nice to see that they just kind of had our back there for it. And looking back on it, it was an interesting thing too, because I think that we could have taken the lesson that, you know, maybe there's a reason why people aren't this transparent with their games, and maybe there's a reason why marketing firms and teams don't show their games until they're at alpha and things are a little more solidified and a plan is in place and the game is looking further to complete. But we actually kind of went the other way with it, and this game, Massive Chalice, was our next Kickstarter after Broken Age, and basically what we did is try to just tear down that wall completely, make everything public, and just assume that if people have all the information at their hands, that they're going to understand what's happening. So that was that. And I think we are at Q&A section now. Is that correct? All right. So it looks like we have about 10 minutes. Thank you. There's a mic in the middle, so if you guys want to come up and ask questions for anyone, feel free.
Hi there. My name's TJ. I'm a student at USC. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your playtest process. Like you mentioned, you bring people in a couple times a week, but how do you sort of brief the playtesters at all? Do you bring the same people over and over again, or is it new people each time?
Gotta go up here. Hello. So how do we do? How do we go about our playtesting process? You asked. And the first specific question you asked was, how do we find people, or was that it?
It was. I asked about if you bring like the same people every time, or people?
So it's kind of a mix of both. And the way we've been doing it, and I don't know if this is like a perfect method, is that we've been we started it with internal people, just people who work at Double Fine who are not on the project and don't know anything about it, and we bring them in and we watch them. They're in the room, they're on the couch, and we sit behind them like creepy, just peepers watching them play. And I'm pretty strict about, like, I don't want anyone talking to them. We don't give them any hints. Even when they're actually frustrated and mad, we don't give them any hints. And we just observe them, and we watch, and then they'll play for maybe an hour, and then we'll ask them some quick questions afterwards. Mostly I want them to, like, tell me the story that you just heard. Like, what are those characters? Who are they? I want to find out whose names they've picked up and whose names they didn't pick up and stuff like that, and tell me what they mostly want, because you want to make sure your characters' motivations are getting across to them. So I'll ask them some quick questions, but really we kind of boot them out really fast, and then we talk about what we saw, and we're like, oh my God, no one clicked on the toaster. What is wrong with that toaster? And we agree on a set of iterations we want to do, and then we try and get that put into our task tracking process as a really high priority item. It's like, we got to get this because we're going to test it again tomorrow. We want to see if, now that we put an American flag on the toaster, if anyone's going to click on it or no. People clicked on it even less. And so that's how we go about that. I learned one tip. Will Wright is a strong believer in paired testing, which is like you bring in two people at once. You don't bring in one person. Bring in two people that are hopefully friends, and they will just talk nonstop the whole time. And that's the best, because you get people explaining. Someone's like, why are you clicking on the toaster? And they're like, oh, I'm trying to electrocute myself so I can go to heaven and get, like, whatever. Like, you can hear they externalize their internal monologues, and so you know what they're trying to solve. Like, oh, that should totally work. We should make that toaster electrocute that guy. And so we bring people in twos wherever possible. And because we're doing a specific, adventure game, we have tried to bring in the same people again to start with their save game and like continue, because we need to track people going all the way through the game. And then there's some areas where we have just a really tricky puzzle, because you don't want to just kill the puzzle. You don't want to like put in a hint. Oh, no one got that hint. Everyone's stuck here. Let's just tell them how to solve it. Like, you don't want to do that, because then you've destroyed the gameplay there. So we're like, how can we just encourage them to solve it? And then you test again, people are still stuck. And you're like, so some parts we'll get new people in every day just to test the same part over and over again if it's really problematic. But we'd like to eventually, watch someone play the game from beginning to end. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Please don't be afraid to line up 30 deep at the microphone. Okay. Just 3.
I have a question about how the bulk of the puzzles, how they, come to fruition. Do they usually start as just a function of a narrative, that you tell a narrative, and the character runs into issues, therefore a puzzle exists? And in order of pacing, do you have to sometimes just add in puzzles because it's just you haven't run into a problem quick enough or often enough?
I sometimes the question was, where do baby puzzles come from? When an obstacle and a solution really love each other. To answer the second question first, I sometimes get really mathematical about it. Like, people said that Full Throttle was too short. I was really mad about that. So I was like, I'm going to make this next game so long. Like, so I sat there and counted all the puzzles in Throttle, and I think they were 20 or something, what I really considered a puzzle. And then I'm going to make 40. In Grim Fandango, there's going to be 40 puzzles. And I was like, I just picked that each puzzle takes 15 minutes to solve, so this game will have this many hours of gameplay. And I do some like really cold numerical analysis on it, just because like it might be wrong, but maybe on average it'll be kind of give you some sense of the scale of the because you're just designing puzzles, it's hard to know exactly how many hours of gameplay you're creating off the bat. And as far as where they come from, it's like one big holistic process for me in terms of like the story and the puzzles and the character. Who that character is depends. That informs how you're going to solve a given puzzle. If your character is really strong, they might solve they might kick a door down, whereas another character might use a bologna sandwich to like grease the floor and make a dog. I forget, that's a really bad puzzle. I was just about to design a really bad puzzle right in front of you. And often I'll start by looking at the unique situation that we're in, like the cloud colony that you saw some of the screenshots, the Meriloft, the town where you're walking on these clouds, has this unique behavior that things, if they have a low pounds per square inch, like literally, like they're not spread out, they'll sink through the clouds. And if you're not moving, you'll sink. And so the character has to keep walking to stay above the clouds, or they'll sink. And heavy objects fall right through it. And that just creates kind of a physical property that I think, start to think, what interesting puzzles would that lead to? Like, could you bury something in the clouds? Could you purposely sink something through the clouds? Could you have to like reinforce something in order to get not sink through the clouds? And that just leads to certain kind of loose puzzles. And then thinking about the player goals, like, well, this player, she really wants to get out of the cloud colony. She wants to leave the cloud colony. So how can she use these puzzle solution tools to achieve those things? And I think some of the humor from a game comes from trying to link those crazy things together. Because you're like, I've got to sink something. But what would sink something? Okay, I got to have a battleship come in or something. Just trying to make those weird connections. Because like weird connections between things is a really important part of humor. So I think that's why adventure games were like had most of the humor than other genres. So I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Sarah. He asked the majority of my question, but
do you want to ask it again? Okay, go ahead.
Yes, dang it. But the other part of puzzles that I was curious about, I know that you guys did Amnesia Fortnite, did develop and prototype ideas, but what other methods do you guys use when you are developing puzzles to test whether they are viable or not?
Sometimes there's depending on how many other people on the team are free, we'll get people together in a room and brainstorm puzzle ideas and just talk about them, and kind of the loose, unstructured conversation. And in terms of where the other ideas come from, gosh, where do ideas come from? Did you guys want to help with that? Any ideas? What? Yeah, the internet. We steal them from the internet. Google ideas. I mean, mostly they just come from people's lives. Like when you're sitting around talking and you're talking about something you saw on TV, and the strangest things will happen, and then you'll all of a sudden you realize you have to get that toaster in the game because you electrocuted yourself by a toaster that morning, and you're going to put that toaster in the game so you can crush it. Yeah, thanks. Hello.
Hi. So I had a question about the 3D models for the characters. Yeah. So it looked like they were just flat polygons, which is really cool. Did you have different models for each direction the character's facing, north, south?
Yes. So the question was, for the character 3D models, do we have different polygons, different models for each of the different angles? And yeah, we do. For the main characters, we have 5 angles, and then they're all part of the same rig. And we have a suite of custom tools that let the artists, control the flip books for like hands, mouths. Sometimes we have full body flip books for crazy positions, and they can also switch the angle as well. And if they want, in an animation, they can mix and match. Like the torso could be from the front 3/4, and the legs could be from the straight on or something. So they that plus the skeletal gives them like a range to do really crazy expressive stuff with the characters.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello. I have some questions about the Moai SDK. And I was wondering if you could
About what?
comment,
I'm sorry, could you say?
The Moai SDK. And I was hoping you could comment on some of the difficulties you ran into that might help indie developers using the SDK. And then I also wanted to ask if Double Fine was planning to contribute any of their improvements to the engine back to the open source SDK.
Right. So the question was, what kind of things we ran into with the Moai SDK while doing the development, and whether or not we are contributing back. I'm gonna answer the second question first. Yes, in fact, we already did. We have very good relationship with Zipline Games, and they helped us a bunch in the past when we had issues and stuff like that. And we did actually give them back a whole bunch of code. And we personally don't follow up on the integration, so it's on their end. Usually we just deliver them code, and then they integrate it into the tech base. And I think I pulled the latest version recently just from Git, and I saw some of my code in there. So some of it made its way back, which is nice. And as far as some of the things we ran into, Moai is great to get kind of started, especially for indies. I think it's a very approachable tech base. And it's just some of the things we ran into, just making a game that needs to run on a very memory reserved like platform and stuff like that. So more like writing tools to help you analyze where's the memory going. There was no real structured way of doing I/O and stuff like that. Just kind of technical details that we were very familiar with from the Buddha engine and stuff like that. And those were just kind of missing because as an indie developer, usually you don't need them. But if you're making really big kind of games, then sooner or later you will need those kind of things. So it's more about kind of those technical things that we needed to add.
Right. Thank you.
Sure.
Is it time? Yeah. Thank you for all the questions, everybody. Thanks for coming, and it was a pleasure talking to you. Bye.